All right, Sarah Wynn here with WTWH Media's Packaging OEM. I am joined by Tom Worsnopp from Festo. Hi, Tom.
Hey Sarah, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing? So, Tom is
Really
here
good.
to walk us through a system configurator demo from Festo. Tom, can you share us a little detail about the system configurator?
Absolutely. So this is a newer tool from Festo. We released it just last year, and it's a web-based tool that lets customers as well as our sales team basically design a field bus topology with Festo components, as well as they can add third-party components as placeholders. And so there's sort of two primary aspects of this. It lets you basically sketch out. This would be sort of like napkin sketch style, like, oh, what does your field bus topology look like? So this is the sort of thing you could sit down with a customer and actually potentially draw out their complete topology, of their machine. So you really have a sense of, okay, what's the backbone of your machine look like? And then the other side of it is you can take that topology you created and then import it into our commissioning tool. And so it makes it much easier to commission the Festo components of that field bus topology. So it's both an entry point for discussions as well as a design tool to help you simplify the commissioning process.
Sweet. It sounds like we're going to have some fun. Are you ready to get started?
Absolutely.
Go for it.
Okay. So you should be able to see my screen now.
Yes.
Excellent. So this is the Festo webpage. I'm just going to start here just so I have a way of showing people how to get to the tool. All of Festo's engineering tools are on this engineering tool tab on festo.com. And so there's actually a number of tools that we could talk about here, for sizing handling guides or for sizing single axis servo solutions. The tool that we're going to look at today is this one, the system configurator. So there's a lot we can talk about with this tool. I want to start with sort of a limited scope, just to highlight the 2 points that I made. Because we could spend a lot of time on it, and I want to just sort of narrow in on those specific points to highlight it. So when you start using the system configurator, it opens a blank, what we refer to as like a topology editor, and this is where I can actually draw the field bus topology. And so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to come into components here on the side. There's a number of menus here as well.
Mhm.
But just for drawing the topology, so I'm going to start in here. And usually when you have a conversation with a customer about what their field bus topology is, you start with, well, what PLC are you using? What field bus are you using? So I'm going to keep this very high level. I don't, it doesn't have to be a Festo PLC, although it could be a Festo PLC. And I'll select from basic PLCs. And let's say this is a Rockwell PLC, which is the most common, I would say, in the North American market. So I could come down here and grab an Ethernet IP PLC, bring that into my topology, and I can rename that. I'll just call that Rockwell PLC. That popped it up for me. And now I've got my controller in the system. And so I'm going to go back to my components menu and now go to basic components. And these are like generic devices. And so I can, if I want to add something specific, like a servo drive, I'll do that in a moment. I can do that. I can also add centralized remote I/O or decentralized remote I/O. And then I have what we call device. This can be anything you want. So for example, if you wanted to add a switch into the topology, this could be, an Ethernet switch, right? Right. The idea is that this can be a placeholder for any third-party device that Festo doesn't have an actual um, module for, right? And that can be part of our topology. Oops. There we go. Now I'm connecting it into that topology. And then let's say the customer is using some servo drives as well, right? So we can add those in. And as I add these devices in, I can use our other configuration tools to actually decide what this device is, for example. So at a high level, this just says servo drive, and I can add it to my topology. Right now, I'm creating this Ethernet IP topology. I want to make it a little prettier. I can move these around slightly. Um, but if I want to use this as a discussion point, this is as deep as I have to go, right? I can add, my remote I/O system here. In this case, I have to select one of the Festo product types. But once I've done that, now I can configure it as Ethernet IP and add it into that topology. So this becomes a really useful way for us to just have a discussion about, well, what kind of devices do you have on your topology? What does your topology look like? I can also do things like group them. So one really nice thing, I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to highlight these components. And these are typically the components that would be inside the control cabinet. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to group them together. And I'm just going to rename that group the control cabinet. Right. And so that just creates a nice visual reminder that these are all together. And then this remote I/O module, it could be with valves, without valves. This is outside. This is on the machine itself, not in the control cabinet. Um, if I want to go to that next step that I talked about earlier, where I can import this into Festo's automation suite, which is our commissioning tool, then I need to actually configure these devices. If I try to import devices that aren't configured, they don't import, right? Because it's like Festo automation suite doesn't know what to do with them because they are not defined, and it only is there to commission Festo devices. So let's take this to the next step, which is I'm going to configure at least these two devices. So the servo drive, I have this little button over here for Start Sizing Assistant, and this is what we call this is our single axis sizing tool. You can get to this separately as well. That's available on the engineering tools website, but it's also integrated directly into the system configurator. So when I click on this, it basically opens up the prompt that you would find in our sizing tool. And let's see, I'm just going to expand this so it takes up the whole screen. And let's say this is a linear movement. These are templates. You can select for your linear movement. I'm just going to select this first one. And normally you would come through here and actually configure what your application is, and then it would size the correct actuator, motor, and servo drive. Here, I'm just going to click continue, and it's going to calculate what some solutions that'll work for this base case, which has, basically no load, and I didn't tell it what stroke or anything like that. And now it provides me with a list of solutions. So, sorry, I didn't mean to click on the tabs here because I'm not going to really hang out in this space much. So let's just say we decide we want this first solution. There's many others here, and I want to add this into my system configurator now, add it to the topology. I click on Add to Topology. And I'm going to minimize this. And now my servo drive has been selected, and this shows the complete bill of materials for that servo axis. So that includes the servo drive, the stepper motor in this case with encoder feedback, our tooth bolt actuator, as well as the motor mounting kit and the cable, right? So this is a complete servo axis that can be used here. Another really nice thing, actually, I'm going to delete this control cabinet, is I can copy and paste this. So let's say I had multiple axes. Let's move this guy out here. Delete this line. Let's say I had multiple axes. I can just copy and paste them. I'm doing Control C, Control V as the hotkeys, but the buttons are up here as well. Copy, cut, and paste. And now I can add those into my architecture. I could also come in and modify these if they were slightly different than the first one. Mm-hmm. And then I can regroup these together. And now that's my control cabinet.
Nice.
And so if I take this file and I import it into the automation suite at this point, I have defined these three components. So those three will be imported into my commissioning software because it knows what those are. Let's take a look now at the remote I/O. I'm going to zoom out, and actually I'll zoom in just on this guy. So right now it says it's an unconfigured device. This is our type code for a remote I/O manifold, CPX-AP-A. And again, I have a configurator for this, right? These are the standard configurators that are on festo.com. So you could come in and just do this configuration for your remote I/O manifold separate from this entire topology editor, but this is a way of doing it and integrating it into this topology. So I'm going to click Start, and this is just going to open up our CPX APA configurator. Now, this requires a little bit of specialized knowledge because you need to have an understanding of what components am I selecting? Am I doing IO link modules? Am I doing digital inputs, digital outputs, and so on and so forth? Let me just pin this so I can scroll up and down easily here. So base configuration, I don't have to modify. It's good as it is. Now I have to decide what modules I'm going to put onto this configuration. By default, it included the Ethernet IP module because I had set up an Ethernet IP system like a fieldbus. So if I click on this module here, you'll see I've got Ethernet IP interface already selected on this one. I do need to select the power supply for this, so I'll just select this first one. But there are a bunch of options for how you can configure the power supply. And then I'm going to let's add another module onto this, and we'll configure this module. Let's say we're going to put some digital outputs on here. For this one, I don't have to configure the power supply. It's going to use the same power supply as the other module on here. But if I wanted to create zones on here, I could create separate zones with power supplies. And let me add another module. I don't want to go too deep down here. You can add up to 15 modules total on a single manifold. But let's put an IO link master in here as well, because that will sort of demonstrate how we can add IO link devices into this field bus topology as well. And that should be good. So that's 3 modules. I'm going to click Accept. And now we have this fully configured manifold here, right? So I've got my Ethernet IP module, I've got my digital output module, and I have my IO link master module, right? Which I can connect up to 4 IO link devices to. I didn't say this explicitly earlier, but anywhere there's sort of a connection point, you get a little colored square or circle, and that indicates where a touch point essentially where you can add additional devices. So let me add an IO link device here. So I can come back to components, and I can go to basic components here, and I can add IO link devices. Now this IO link device, I can come here and configure it. This can be a Festo device. So there's a little compact electric cylinder we have called the EPCE. And I'll just select this first version. It doesn't matter. You would select the actual one you were using, and I'll save that. And now you can see a little image of it. And now I'm going to connect that back to the IO link master, right? And so now it's connected to port 0 on this IO link master. But I don't only have to use Festo devices. I can, oops, let me drag that over. I can also add third-party devices. So this could be, let's say something from IFM. I don't know IFM's product line in particular, but this is an example. So I don't know what a PP000E does, but we're going to save it as that. And basically, we have access to any IODD file, any IO link device description file from the competition if they have registered it with the IO link finder tool, which is it's an online database basically of all the IO link devices. So that's how we're able to add third-party devices into our topology. It's not because we're storing their information. It's because it's in this database. And as long as they're registered in the database, we can pull that in. And so I've got a Festo device here, and now I've got this IFM device, which obviously I wouldn't be adding that if I didn't know what it was, but in a real situation. But here I don't know what this device is. And then let me point to one more thing about this topology that I can do. So one of the really nice aspects of our CPX APA is that we can take the backplane, right? So the communication across these modules we refer to that as the AP backplane. It's just the backplane that allows us to communicate with all the modules. We can extend that backplane out to additional devices. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some decentralized remote IO. I'm going to add one of these modules here. And so the idea is I could have this on one part of my machine, centralized to that part of the machine. And then maybe I need some additional IO further out on the machine, right? Maybe it's down a conveyor line or something like that. And I can just add that module or those modules and connect them on the backplane. So now it's communicating across that backplane, and now it just separates this one module and places it out somewhere else on the machine. And this one, I'll configure it for, we can do IO link on this one as well. And now I can just connect this little blue circle up to here. And now it's added to the backplane of this system. So when this Rockwell PLC is communicating with everything, it communicates Ethernet IP to all of these devices. And then that goes into our CPX, our centralized remote IO, CPX APA. And then from there, we add this additional module onto the backplane of that. And so that's just the Festo communication, right? So we communicate Ethernet IP up to this module, and then our backplane to any modules that are off of the manifold. And I could add additional IO link devices here if I wanted. But for the sake of simplicity, we'll just leave it here. So this is if we're using a Rockwell PLC. I do want to use this as a way of pointing out that Festo has PLCs as well, right? And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab all of these devices here. Oh, actually, let me delete the PLC first. So, do you have any questions for me, Sarah? I'm sorry, I'm just rambling here.
Oh, I'm just wondering if does this tool require a subscription? Can anyone use it?
Anyone can, that's a great question. So I did not log in at all when I did
Mhm.
this. This is all unlogged in. There's a limit to the number of devices you can have in your topology. I want to say it's 10 devices if you're not logged in. Logging into Festo is it's free. You can create well, creating an account is free. So anyone can create an account. It gets created, and then you're able to create unlimited topologies, essentially,
Okay.
right? Yeah, so it is completely free to use. You do need to log in order to see the full functionality. The other aspect of this is I'm creating all of this and it's being saved. Well, actually, I haven't saved it yet. But once I do go to save this, it'll save it into my Festo account. And so when I go to the next step, which is importing this into Automation Suite, I can do that through my account. So I'll log into Automation Suite with my Festo account, and then I don't have to transfer any files. It's all happening through through the Festo side.
Nice.
Um,
So
so yeah, go ahead.
We had our Rockwell PLC in there before. Let's say we wanted to swap it to another PLC. Can you show us how
Mhm.
to do that?
Perfect, because that's exactly what I want us to do.
Nice.
So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to select controllers. So under basic PLCs, these are just generic. But I want to do a Festo controller now. And let's grab our latest and greatest, CEPE. And now you'll notice I've got this. Here, let me zoom in. I've got this nice orange or yellow dot here.
Mhm.
And I cannot connect that into this field bus. And that's because these guys are all, sorry, let me select in. These are all configured for Ethernet IP. Can I do this one too? No, as soon as I connect that one. So I'm going to change these to EtherCAT, right? Now I can connect these servo drives onto my Festo PLC. And now to change this one, because I've already configured it for Ethernet IP, I have to come in here and change this. Oh, there's a slightly different process because I've already configured the module, right?
Mhm.
So I've configured this entire part type code. I actually have to come back in and use the configurator to modify that. So let me just do that. I'll change it to an EtherCAT node from an Ethernet IP node. There we go, EtherCAT. And I didn't change any of the other modules on here. Did it accept it? I think it did. No, didn't. Okay, there we go. I'm going to zoom out. Now you can see it has changed it, right? And it changed the back code here, which only if you know the Festo part order codes would you be able to recognize that. But it was an EP and now it's an EC here. And now I've changed this to an EtherCAT network, right? There's other ways to do this. Like I could take this project and let's say I wanted to have an Ethernet IP version and a EtherCAT version.
Mhm.
I could have both of those, but I haven't saved this yet. And so until I save this project, I can't do any of that. So let's go ahead and save it actually. It says I need to log in. Okay, we're logged in. I'm going to save it. Click save, and now I'm going to be prompted to save this in my Festo project space, right?
Mhm.
And so I can save it as part of an existing project if I want, or I can create a new project. So I'll create a new one, and I'll call this webinar project. And within every project, I can create multiple topologies, right? So this can be my EtherCAT topology, and I'll save that. And then I could duplicate
Mhm.
this topology and then do what I did, modify it back to being Ethernet IP, and then save that as an Ethernet IP topology. So that way I can have multiple topologies within a single project. And so where that's valuable is for if you're like a specialty machine builder and you have customers who you're basically building the same setup, but oh, this customer's using a Rockwell PLC, so I want to have the Ethernet IP version for them. This makes it easy to just have both of those projects basically be the same, except we've changed the front end of how we're interacting with that entire, machine that I'm selling. So I think we can pause at this point here. There's way more I could talk about within the system configurator, but I want to show you the next step, which is importing this into Festo Automation Suite. And
Um,
so this is my, oh, sorry, go ahead.
let's do it.
Okay, perfect. So let me open up Automation Suite. And from the main menu here, I can create a new project or I
Mhm.
can just click import data. So let's do that since we can do that directly. Um, I can import from our other sizing tools like our handling guide online, which lets us do handling systems, electric motion sizing, which is just single axis systems, or system configurator. And when I import from system configurator, well, you can see when I opened Automation Suite, I was
Mhm.
actually prompted to log in. And so you can see I'm logged in to my account already. It is possible to download the topology and then import it from my hard drive locally,
Mhm.
but this is easier. I mean, to be honest, that just whenever I do one of these systems topologies, I just leave it in festo.com and then I import it from there. So that's what I'm going to do here. I created a new one, but Automation Suite
Um,
was open.
if
Yeah.
I wanted Automation Suite, do I download that from Festo's website? How do I get it?
Correct. Yes, and Automation Suite is also completely free. It's our tool for basically configuring all of our devices. So if you buy a Festo Servo drive, well, you're going to have to configure that device before you're able to use it. Tell it what motor is attached to it, what actuator, and so on, and configure the Ethernet IP address and so on. And so this is the software that lets you do that. Same is true for our remote I/O modules. You'll have to configure what the modules do, if they have a fail-safe mode, anything like that. So anyway, I had Automation Suite open, and so the project I saved is not in this list. So I'm going to click refresh, and it should add it right to the top of this list. And there we go. So I have webinar project. That's the one I created. And I created an EtherCAT topology, which I saved as EtherCAT. When I click on this, you will see an image of that topology appear over here, and then I can just click my Festo to import that.
Very easy.
Yeah, it really is intended to make it as seamless as possible, so that you can go from designing with Festo components to importing those and commissioning those. And if all the information you entered on the system configurator is accurate, it really minimizes the amount of configuration you have to do in software. Okay, import was successful, and we should see our complete topology here. And so even the third-party device, yeah, IO link device, that gets imported because we have access to that IODD, IO-link description file system. So it imports the IODD file. It imports all of the Festo components. It knows the Festo components. All of these are fully configured, right? So this has the actual modules that we specified. And if we open up one of these servo drives, for example, give it a minute. It always takes a minute when you first open it.
Mhm.
It should include basically the bill of materials that we had. So it'll be the same motor that we configured, the same actuator that we configured, the same yeah, I'm going to accept all of this. Um, the same cable, right? And you can see that here. So this is our servo drive, our motor, actuator, and motor mounting kit. And all of this is exactly what we sized in the sizing tool. All right, I have to move this because the zoom is blocking my grip here. So if I come back to the topology, I've got all of my devices here. I've got my controller here. If I want to program the controller, I can double click on this and open up Codesys, which is a free programming environment to program this in. So yeah, basically it's a whole ecosystem from design all the way through to commissioning. And we're continually adding more products into the system configurator, expanding it, making it more useful. We're about 7 months out from release, 6 months out from release. So it's still very new. But that's sort of the gist of it.
For packaging, what types of machines or projects do you think would benefit most from this tool?
That's a good question. I mean, any machine could benefit from it. Maybe the most, if we think about like end users or specialty machine, like there's different ways to think about it. We could think about it from an industry term or from a customer type, like are they own an OEM or a specialty machine builder? Um, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say that there's a limitation to any particular industry or any particular, because then it's really more like, well, which products are beneficial to those industries?
Mhm.
So, I could say, in one industry, they might be using more servo drives and less remote I/O, and in a different industry, they might be using more remote I/O and less
Mhm.
and fewer servo drives. And you could see that could be a balance. But at the end of the day, anyone who's building a serious machine is going to have a PLC or a motion controller on there, and they're going to be using a field bus to connect all their devices to it. And so this, even if you're just using it as a sketch tool, like let's say there's limited Festo components on a machine, well, this can still be a place where I sketch out the topology and then we have a conversation. Well, you're using, this type of servo drive. Do you want to consider using a Festo servo drive? So it can be a sales tool as well. So I would say it's pretty industry independent and in an application independent because most machines are going to be, from a hierarchical point of view, they're going to be approaching it the same way of I've got a controller and I've got a field bus that I'm controlling it. And so this is still a useful tool across industries and across customer types, I would say.
So would you say it helps engineers reduce errors and for OEM speed up machine design?
Yeah, definitely. Because one of those things that can be the hang up is you've got this person who designs the machine, the field bus, right? And they say, okay, this is what I'm going to use for the servo drive and the motor and the actuator, and this is what I'm going to use for the remote I/O. Um, and they do all of that, and then they create their bill of materials, and then somebody else in the company maybe orders all of that, and then the person who sets everything up might be a totally different person. And that actually takes us to um, one of the nice things about this is if you're the person who's doing this design, you can very easily then share this with other people on your team, right?
Mhm.
So let's go into here. I just clicked on this menu over here, and I'm going to go to My Festo project, and that's going to open the project associated with this topology. So inside of here, I can a little share icon up here.
Mhm.
Like you type in the person's email address and you would assign them as either just read access or as an editor. So if it's someone I'm collaborating with on my team, I would set them up as an editor. Maybe I'm the person who's doing all the servo drive sizing, but I share it with them, and then they configure the remote I/O modules because
Mhm.
they know what's supposed to be in there, and then I can share it also with the person who's doing the commissioning, and then they can import using their Festo account into Automation Suite. So this becomes a way of sharing this um, with other people on your team or with customers. If you're the machine builder and you wanted to share some aspect of this with them, you can share it. So it just creates a portal for sharing everything related to the project.
That's nice,
Let's
especially in a world where people are in so many different places. There's still this
Yeah,
one common access point where everyone can look at the same project.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, I would say that this tool is really good at reducing errors because it creates a common place instead of, sort of copy paste errors you get from, well, I sent you this document and then you looked at the document and you said, okay, this is what the drive was you ordered, and I input that, and oh, this is the acceleration you said to use on this. Instead, it's actually embedded in the drive. So I know what the limits are. I know what I should be doing. And so it should reduce errors when it's used in this way of just I'm importing it instead of, actually looking up what it was.
Yeah. And then I guess a user functionality question. We have the EtherCAT set up in front of us. Those icons are yellow. The
Hmm.
previous one we had set up, they were blue. Is that
Yep.
intentionally designed for ease of use?
Yes. Yes. And so actually there are 4 field buses that we support for basically every device we have. Well, not our control. Our controllers are always EtherCAT masters. That's pretty typical that the controller is um, locked in. But our devices, for example, these can be EtherCAT, Profinet, Ethernet IP, or Modbus TCP. And so I guess I can just change this. So if I change it to Profinet, it breaks the
Mhm.
topology because it's now a Profi. It's got these green icons, and that's Profinet. And if I do Modbus TCP, it's still blue, but it's slightly different blue. So if I make this one, sorry, let me make this one Ethernet IP. You can see I've got this dark blue
Yeah.
for Ethernet IP and this lighter blue for Modbus. Um, so yeah, yeah, it just makes it visually um, easy to differentiate. And in theory, somebody could have multiple systems on the same topology. I wouldn't recommend it. I would just create a new topology with a different field bus. I feel like the field bus is sort of central to the topology. Um, but the way this is set up, you could actually have both topologies with different field buses in the same editor, and it would work.
How do you think the system configurator will change the way machine builders design equipment?
Um, so I think it becomes in the same way that software sort of does with anything, so it's like, when you're doing a topology like this, you might have a software tool already. They do exist where you can sketch everything out. Um, but how easily it integrates across multiple suppliers and something like that I don't know. And then, I think a lot of customers, they might not be drawing out a topology. That might be, especially in the early stages, it really might be like, you get a sheet of paper and you're like, these are the devices I'm going to use. And then it's only later in the design process that you really put that into software. So I think this makes it easier to get in early in the design process for those kinds of conversations
Mhm.
where it's like, okay, well, what does your topology look like? And so it does make it easier to enter that place and just sketch out a topology. And so I think that's one of the real advantages. From the Festo standpoint, it's also much easier if you're able to import everything that you've configured in here right into the commissioning tool, right? So yeah, I'd say it definitely makes it easier. Um, for any machine builder to get into that.
Well, it's nice that you're in New York, I'm in Ohio. If we wanted to
Mm,
work on this together, this is a one nice platform we can come together on that instead
yeah,
of texting each other pictures of our sketches, things like that. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And it's super easy. We could work on it. in theory at the same time. I don't know that I've ever been in a project simultaneously with somebody, but yeah. And so you just, as long as we're both sharing, then we both have access to it, and we can be in there.
And then, is there anything else you want OEMs to know about System Configurator?
Um, that's a good question. So specifically OEMs, um, give it a try.
Give it a
Honestly,
try.
it's so new that we're still getting feedback from people like, oh, can it do this? In some cases, somebody asks about something and it's like, oh yeah, it can, right? And you just have to, find the lever to pull. And in other cases, it's like, oh no, that sounds like a really cool feature. Let's add that in for you. So I would say try it out. And I don't expect OEMs to be contacting us and telling us how to improve our software, although I would love it if they did. But it's yeah, give it a try and see how it works for your process, right? Does it integrate easily for you? I think customers who are already in the Festo ecosystem a little bit, like let's say they're already using our valves, using our remote AO, um, or using our server drive, it makes it easier for them to then have multiple pieces of our ecosystem and use them all together and combine them in a way that didn't exist really before this tool. So, like if you were doing remote I/O and valves, it was really its own thing from separate from sizing a server drive and integrating it with our controllers. These were all sort of separate pieces of the puzzle, and so this becomes a nice way to look at all of them. So definitely for customers, the more Festo they're using, the more useful this tool becomes. Um, but it's still useful just as a sketch tool as
Yeah,
well.
definitely. And are you, it's relatively new. Are you seeing a lot of customer adoption
I don't have a way to measure that actually. That's a good point though.
or
Headquarters.
feedback?
So no, that's a great point. Yeah, we're getting a lot of great feedback on it, which is really nice. Some people are looking for new features, and that's good feedback for us. And other people are just like, oh, this works great. I didn't realize you had something like this. Um, so we get it from both sides. Um, in theory, so this is developed in headquarters in Germany, and in theory, they can monitor who's using it, and so they must have um, some metrics
Yeah.
for adoption. I don't know offhand what those are. Um,
What
I
was
should
the
inquire.
what was the inspiration to create this tool?
Well, I think it's really just sort of well, there's two pieces to that. One is more and more we want to be providing the 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 software pieces that make it easier to go from the design stage through to the commissioning stage. So for example, the sizing tool that you would use to size a servo axis, we've had that tool for years, and with that tool, you could go from sizing it all the way to importing that specific sizing into the commissioning tool. And again, that's something we've had for years, but it didn't have any way to then incorporate these other components, right?
Mhm.
And so this was sort of the next logical step in a way for us to say, well, okay, how do we make it even easier for customers to, you know, integrate all of these components that we have, right? So you've got customers using valves, using remote I/O. How can we make it easier for them to also pull in our other components like our servo drives, our controller. And so, yeah, I think I don't know that we started with a plan, like if you go back, 5 years, that this was going to be the end result,
Mhm.
but it's definitely like made sense as we've developed, each piece of this to be like, well, how do we link these pieces and how do we make it more seamless for a customer to use these. And so we're building up towards something and you know the more tools we have, the more tools we can add into that ecosystem. And so, it feeds on itself to create a whole ecosystem for customers and then for a sales team to use.
Yeah, and you can use third party hardware too. You can use Festo and other products. Yeah,
Sorry, excuse me.
you're okay.
Um, Yeah, you can definitely see that with the
Hmm.
IO Link especially. Um, if it was a third-party device that we don't have any support for, then you'd add it as a generic device essentially. So that what I showed her, oops, not PLC, basic components,
Hmm.
that basic device, right? You know, and that becomes a placeholder, and it's not something you can order from us or configure from us because it's a third-party device, but it can be represented in the topology.
Got it. Awesome,
Yeah.
Tom. Anything else you may want to add?
Um, there's a lot more here that we didn't get into.
Hmm.
You can do more on the back end in the project area. Um, I showed you how to import this from your Festo login. You don't have to do that. You can, so, some customers, they want to download everything and store it locally, which makes sense, gives them a sense of security there. And they can do that and then import it from local. So there's a lot of things that you can do in here. We are continuing to add additional products. So this doesn't include every Festo product at the moment, but we're adding more. And one example is at the moment, we have this reference to single axis sizing as a solution that you can add. We're going to add the handling guide online in the coming months, and that's our sizing tool for multi-axis handling systems, right? So you can order a two-axis or three-axis handling system, across a range of stroke lengths and payloads, and that'll be integrated into here. And so now you'll just be able to add that sizing in, and then you would basically say, okay, let's size that handling system. And so it just incorporates all of that. Um, Again, bringing our existing tools into this ecosystem and making it all more of a seamless experience for customers.
Definitely. And one final question. Last time
Yeah,
we talked about the CMMTAS servo drive. Is that in here in
that is
this?
in here.
Yes.
Yes.
Nice.
So actually, this is our CMMT ST. The AS is just a different version. So ST refers to stepper, right? And this can be used, it's our DC servo drive. The CMMT AS is our AC servo drive, essentially. So it's just, you know, they all play on in the same world. They use the same function blocks and everything like that. This is just the low power DC version versus the AC version that we talked about last time.
Nice. Well, Tom, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for
Absolutely.
sharing this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Always a pleasure.